This era is now mythologized in memory, but the story between the Windrush arrival and the Windrush scandal has been suppressed until now. A government report detailing what led Windrush migrants to be wrongfully detained, deported or denied rights had been prevented from being made public by the last government. Now that report has finally been made public by the Home Office, but only because the judge said they had to after a legal challenge. The report said during the period 1950 to 1981, every single piece of immigration or citizenship legislation was designed at least in part to reduce the number of people with black or brown skin in the UK. Within the next 100 years, the report said that British immigration policy had been influenced by this man, Enoch Powell. The report said government laws had first widened and then narrowed what it meant to be British. Whereas the 1948 Nationality Act had underpinned that the Windrush generation were British, the 1971 Immigration Act said they never were, unless their parents had been born on the British shores. Roland was born in Britain, but briefly denied the right to be here. His family were impacted.
My brother and I was locked out of the UK from 1973 until 1988. So for 15 years, we were not allowed back into the UK. That story, I being born here and had issue returning to the UK, is not unique to myself. I've always believed, well, no, I wouldn't say believe, that most of the immigration policies that were brought about were influenced by, I would say, racist ideologies. And the utterance at the time was that there were too many black and brown people entering the UK, and a way needs to be found to reduce the numbers.
The Windrush now has an official day of celebration, yet the government chose to suppress a basic account of British history. The question for those affected is why and what now?
Well, I'm joined now by Jackie McKenzie, who's an immigration and human rights lawyer who represents hundreds of people impacted by the Windrush scandal. Jackie McKenzie, what do you think is the real reason why the Home Office blocked the publication of this report for so long?
I don't know. It's a very odd thing to have done. I mean, and so as a result of it, the main story has been about the suppression of the report rather than the contents of the report. But I think each time Windrush appears in the news, I think this government, successive governments, feel a sense of shame, a sense of embarrassment, and just don't really want to engage with it. And it's one of the reasons why it's not going very well.
Well, I want to talk about the context of the report in just a moment. But I mean, just to say on that previous question, the Home Office argued previously that publication might damage trust in the government, its future development of immigration policy. They suggested in legal arguments that the historian might be biased. Is there any justification behind those claims?
No, absolutely not. And the people affected by the scandal, the victims, mainly black and brown people, already know that racism underpinned what happened to them. So what further trust can you breach? The worst has happened. People were denied jobs, educational opportunities, people were detained, put in immigration removal centres, some people were deported and removed, and we know people have died prematurely because of the stress of it all. What further trust could you betray? And what should have happened? The government should have seen this report done by an academic. It's 52 pages, which is very short, so it's obviously a précis of a much bigger piece of work, which is so potent, so important, and they should have seen this as an opportunity to really understand how racism impacts on people's lives and then decide what can we do about it.
Well, I mean, the report was commissioned to try and help the civil service in the Home Office learn about Britain's colonial history. I mean, do you think anyone in there has read this report? Do you think that, the civil service is educating itself?
Well, so as you know, there were 30 recommendations in a report done by Wendy Williams. It was called the Windrush Lessons Learned Review. And the Home Office, previous Home Secretaries have said, and I don't count the current Homes, I'm talking about previous governments, have said that about 26 of those recommendations have been implemented. And you remember 3 of them they tried to cancel until recent, legal action. And they have provided absolutely no evidence of how they've evaluated that those recommendations have been implemented. Now, this particular report was commissioned as a result of Recommendation 6, which was about making sure existing and new members of staff in the Home Office were made aware of the history of migration into the UK, and particularly, and there were several bits to it, but just summarise it down, and in particular the history of black people in the UK. And they say they've implemented it, but how? Has everybody done a course? I understand there was a quiz that some people undertook, but I've spoken to people in the Home Office and they weren't even aware of this report.
Right, so you don't have much faith that
I don't have much faith. But also, if you're just going to do it piecemeal, you know, sort of a tick box quiz, and I mean, how is that really ensuring that people are properly educated on these issues?
Do you have any faith that things are changing under the new government? Because, you know, there's been some quite tough rhetoric on asylum and immigration since Keir Starmer came to power, but do you think things are changing?
Well, interestingly, one of the things that this report says is that both the left and the right have been equally bad on immigration. So, for instance, it goes on that back when the Windrush started arriving, trade unions on the left and even Labour governments were very concerned about migrants taking jobs and so forth. And on the right, of course, they were very concerned about cultural identity and so on, the sort of thing we're hearing again now from people like Robert Jenrick. And his summation of that was that both sides are concerned about immigration, particularly because of how it plays out in elections. And I think, unfortunately, we saw with the race riots, not enough coming from the current government to talk about the positives about migration.
There was a nervousness about talking.
I think there's a nervousness. And, you know, and at the moment, their entire discussion around immigration has been about small boats and cracking the smugglers. Now, of course, everybody wants to crack the smugglers and the traffickers and so forth, but that seems to have been their emphasis. Simon Mulhaughter, the Minister for Migration and Citizenship, has written to people this morning, and I got a letter, and that's very encouraging, in that she's saying she wants to do something.
Right. Apologies, we could go on talking about this, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Jackie McKenzie, thank you very much for joining us.